Welcome to the Mad Ones. I'm your like sparkling water, entirely too much host, Cam Harless, and joining me today as guest host is a man who loves to make content. He's the host of Wartime Propaganda, Conspiracy Pilled, and Last American Pubcast. He's also got a pair of pretty tight chops on his face. It's Mr. PJ Williams.
Hey Cam, thanks for having me on tonight, man.
It's nice to have you on. I think it's kind of funny though, because I've been on Wartime Propaganda and the Last American
Pubcast. Yeah. It's all good.
And I was like, I need to invite him on at some point, but I didn't expect that I was going to be inviting you on as a co-host first.
Yeah.
But it works out well. It's like that's a pretty good setup for a first time being on the show.
Yeah, no, I like it. I'm excited.
All right, so I'm gonna do some of the house cleaning real quick. Just so everyone knows, before we get to the show is 100% brought to you by fans and patrons. So hit like, subscribe, and share the show with your friends. There's all sorts of topics that we've covered and that we will cover in the future. This next Thursday is going to be really cool as well. But share them with someone who might gain something for them, or it might make them think or be nicer to you. I don't know. But if you'd like to support us, the best possible way to do that, unfortunately, is Patreon. There you'll get an occasional early episode, a Zoom hangout, and my eternal gratitude. So hit up patreon.com/themadOnes. And if you want a shirt, if you want a rep, I don't have my shirt on today. I'm a bad host. If you want a shirt or a tank top, which is the preferred shirt of the show, go to wearethemadOnes.com/store. And that way you can rep us wherever you are. We also have mugs if you're into coffee. But let's get to the show. Let's do the thing. Joining us tonight is a narcissist. Usually when you hear that, it's someone being a jerk to someone else by calling them that. But tonight's guest is a self-aware narcissist who's trying to take care of that and heal the issues that have plagued him and the others around him. With his project, Raw Motivation, he works to help other narcissists get better, help those who have suffered narcissistic abuse, and he spreads awareness of that abuse. He's a very interesting man, and I can't wait to hear his story. It's Mr. Ben Taylor.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much for having me on.
Thank you for coming on. I think I first messaged you probably like 4 or 5 months ago, so I'm just glad it worked out.
Yeah, it's been a while. I kept like bumping it down, and then it got lost for a period of time, and then I think I emailed you, and it got lost for a period of time. So kind of touch and go back there.
Oh yeah, for sure. So obviously, you don't hear many people claiming to be narcissists themselves. Mm-hmm. Typically, it's someone else claiming that they are.
Right.
Which may or may not be true. I think it's definitely something that people overdiagnose against others, kind of in general. Right. I know that because I've had friends who were decidedly not narcissists, but people would call them that and like try to clinically, diagnose them with narcissism, personality disorder, NPD, rather than just straight up narcissist. And I don't think that's fair, but it's interesting that you call yourself that. You call yourself a self-aware narcissist. So just to get into the meat and bones, first, if you're cool with it, I would love to hear your story, and I'd love to hear how you either learned that you became a narcissist or accepted that you were one, and how did that occur?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I think like a big part was, early on, I was always moving and always traveling. So my dad was an evangelist. We actually traveled all over the U.S., about 40 to 45 churches a year. So we were moving pretty much every single week. And so there wasn't really a time to like gain roots anywhere. And so growing up, I started getting to a place where I knew I interacted and I responded differently to different situations and different people than what other people would. Big aspect was the idea of like empathy. Having that empathy, having, tears, having like different like sympathy and different things like that. I was like, I don't really connect the same as other people. It kind of was even a joke early on, like the household of like, oh, like there's actually like a tier or something there, like write it down in the calendar, because it wasn't something that was, normal at all, ever. Right. And so like growing up, there was stuff like that. But as I continued into high school and started into college, I started into these like cycles of being with girls, then being with women, and like going through different things. So I thought, hey, like there's always like the idea of being with someone, and then as that relationship was, ending or starting on the decline, then someone else was starting. There was never like a gap or like a
Right.
break where like I'm alone with myself. It was always having to have someone constantly, kind of like back to back kind of thing. That continued through high school, through college. It got to the place where, I got to the place where I was about ready to get engaged to one girl. That fell through. Met my wife. That's continued that whole cycle. And I thought it was going to stop. I thought it was going to stop. Oh, I get married and, that just fixes everything. That's the person I'm supposed to be with, or it's just the next thing I'm supposed to do. And then once I do, then I don't really have to worry about it anymore. But unfortunately, after marriage, two things really, like right after marriage, that's when a lot of times I would term it now being like the mask started to fall, as far as like how I was treating my wife, how I was interacting with her, wasn't loving, wasn't kind, and started going down that emotional and mental abuse side. Within right after about the first year of marriage is when I ended up starting the first affair. And the rest of our marriage had a period of 5 different affairs over about a 6-7 year gap. And so like going through all that, I was always like looking for, something, was trying to find like that idea of like ideal love, or like, I don't get this validation or get this respect or love from my wife, so I'm going to find it with someone else. And then, that would fall through, and then someone else, and it's always kind of like a cycle. And I got to a place where I remember thinking like, maybe this is just how I'm always going to be. I got to a place where I was like, maybe I'm just cursed. Maybe this is a curse that I have, that it's always going to be like this, and there's nothing I can do to fix it. And I remember I thought that actually when we were out like in Kentucky before we moved here to Virginia. And the reason why I thought this, I got back from a trip that I've been on where I'd met up with someone and had an affair. And then I got back, and that was literally right after I got back was the time that my wife said, hey, we're pregnant. Now I was like brand new. I was like, whoa, all that kind of stuff. We moved, and then it was probably about like a month later, 2 months later, that we lost the baby. And so there was a part of me that even like took that and was like, oh, from my Christian background, I was like, oh, maybe that was because of me, because I cheated, because I had an affair. Maybe that's, why that happened, so there's a lot of different things, but that didn't stop anything, because there was 2 affairs that happened after that. Cause I was kind of like in the middle. And I remember like just getting to the place of it just being repetitive. And I'm like, there's a cycle, and I don't know what it is. I got to a place I was just like frustrated and mad because the cycle wasn't stopping, and I didn't know how to fix it. And, stuff kind of fell out with different aspects of my life, of people finding out, me confessing different aspects. And I got to the place, I remember there's one time where I was, kind of a slight moment of like self-awareness where I asked my wife, I was like, I don't get it. I was like, I connect differently. Like, I don't feel like stuff for different people. I was like, maybe I'm just like a sociopath. And so like we looked it up, and she was like, no, I don't think you are. I think you might be a narcissist. And I was like, no, hell no. Like, I'm not a narcissist,
Nobody wants to take that.
I mean, at that time, I went to other people. I went to, supplies. I went to other affair partners, other friends, to make sure they knew I wasn't a narcissist, so they could go tell her that I wasn't a narcissist, like the whole thing kind of thing.
Wow.
But then like over a period of time, there was the last couple affairs that came out. Both my boss and my wife was like, maybe it's a sex addiction, let's look into that. There's a couple different things that transpired out of that. I started just like looking of like, I don't know what to do. I don't know what to look for, because, I'd grown up in religion. I'd grown up in Christianity, and that wasn't like, I guess you could say like quote unquote, like fixing it for me, just like talking to people, just confessing it to like my pastor, like different things like that. It's just, I wasn't figuring it out. I ended up stumbling across a group online called Wake Up Warrior, run by Garrett J. White. And I ended up joining their 30-day challenge, the Wake Up Warrior challenge. And I walked into that being like, okay, let's see what this is going to be. And the guy, like right at the very beginning was like, if you want to be a man, you need to stop fucking lying. Like, it was just like right in the face. And I was like, going into it, I was like, oh no, I have lies, but that's like with other people, but I don't really have any of myself. And I didn't realize walking into it, like I was filled of my own lies to myself, not just lying to others, not just lying to like boss, to God, to my wife, everything like that. But there's also like the lies that I was believing inside myself that was, continuing that cycle. Just like the idea of saying like, hey, I think I'm a good person, even though I'm still cheating, I'm still a good person. Like the lies that I would believe. And so I have a couple of videos on those, but I did like there were 7 lies that was brought forth during that time there that really kind of opened my eyes to just the idea of it. With working with teams and stuff like that, when I was working with the company Chick-fil-A, I started like realizing my personality was different. There's more things like getting revealed, and some of that was through disc personality, Myers-Briggs, Enneagram, like different personalities. It's like, wait, like this is different of how you interact compared to everybody else. I started learning the book like Emotional Intelligence, the Brene Brown's book Daring Greatly, which touches on shame and vulnerability, which are giant aspects of narcissism that I learned about, but I didn't attach them to narcissism. And in fact, like side note, like the book from Brene Brown Daring Greatly that talks about shame and vulnerability wasn't until the 3rd time I read it that I actually realized there was a section about narcissists. It didn't exist, the first couple times I read it. But my boss, my wife, they sent me away to a sex addiction intensive. That was like it was like a 12-hour day, like multiple day kind of thing. And I finally got to the place as I was going through that, due to some of my research, some of the stuff I've been considering, I was like, I don't have a sex addiction. And I was like, if I don't have a sex addiction, then that means I probably have narcissism. And that was something that I didn't want to come to terms with. But it was at that point where I was like, I've exhausted all the other stuff. It's not a curse, it's not all this other stuff. So it's got to be something. So I ended up reaching out. I went to EMDR therapy. I did that for a period of like 6 months, where I just went in and it cleared some trauma, some emotional trauma that like I didn't even know that I had. I walked in and I was like, trauma? Like, I don't have trauma. Like, nobody beat me or anything like that, So, like, I walked in, and so that was a whole different thing. So 6 months of that. And then a little bit after that, I started into regular, like cognitive, like, behavioral based, like therapy, and started working with a therapist. Went through 4 different therapists before I found the one that I was with now. One of the therapists, like, ghosted me. One of the therapists was, like, super judgy. And I'm like, okay, I don't feel safe to share my story. The other one, like, tried to gaslight me, saying that we talked about ADHD, and I was like, no, we talked about narcissism. So I was like, okay, forget that. Went to the therapist I'm with now in first session. She just kind of opened it up. First session, we kind of went through some stuff, and we got like halfway through, and I didn't get like choked up, but like I felt something, almost like that effect, and I was like, this is where I'm supposed to be. And so now it's been 19 months that I've actually been, with that therapist on a weekly basis. Make sure that I go every single week. Kind of one thing that I like to preface with it is I went to EMDR therapy for 6 months and then was in regular therapy after that for about like 3 months. And then that's when my wife left me, because there wasn't, even though I was doing the work, I was putting stuff in, there wasn't actually change behavior. And it was one of those things that, like, when she left, it was literally like the day she left, I met up with somebody else like later that day. So she was gone for about a little bit over a quarter of a year. And the only reason she came back, one, she had to come back to even get stuff. And she decided she was going to come back. She was going to give it like a trial run of like, I'll be here for like a month, I'll be here for a short period of time to see, if there's change behavior. And when she came back, there was change behavior because of stuff that I've been working on, the stuff that I've been realizing over a period of time while she's been gone. So now she's been back. I've been doing therapy now for 19 months of that particular style therapy. My wife has been doing therapy for, like almost like double that, probably like 2.5, maybe close to like 3 years. We started couples therapy a little bit ago, like this year. I want to say like February, maybe something like that, which I don't recommend to most people as far as like if they're with a narcissist to go to therapy with that person. We felt like it was at a good timing because we already had single therapy for a period of time underneath our belts. And so we figured there was a way we could come back together and work on it. And there was also all 3 of our therapists signed like NDAs. So like all 3 of them could talk and see if we were like, saying stuff that wasn't true either way. So I guess kind of wrap up some of my story. So I started just doing TikToks and stuff like that. I started actually on Instagram a year ago in March of 2021. And I just originally was posting like on my personal page. I was like sharing, just some posts, wasn't doing a video, just sharing some posts about narcissism, about stuff that I was learning, about the lies that I believe. And that's when I started having some people like kind of come out of the woodwork, like at me. And it wasn't the regular people you'd think. it was the Christians that I went to school with, or that I grew up with, or, you know, that were in the churches. And I never forget, there's one guy that contacted me that was like a friend in college, and he was like, dude, he's like, you really be thinking about what you're putting on the internet, because like, you have a wife and a daughter. And, you know, I thought about that, and I was like, yeah, that's why I want to be putting this out on the internet, because I don't want my daughter to actually end up getting with someone like me, who's going to be that type of abusive person to someone else. And so I kind of like disappeared a little bit. I kind of pulled back from posting, doing stuff like that. And I went and I finally filmed like my first TikTok, and started having like traction there. It started growing really quickly. So end of last year, in October, is when people had started asking me about, hey, you should do one-on-ones, you should start talking to people. So I started doing some coaching. That turned into a full coaching size regiment. Got on all the different platforms around December, January time, and then ended up just seeing the business like pick up really well, as far as like, hey, there's a huge aspect that I can be a huge help to people, putting out content on all different platforms, and then trying to meet with people really all over the globe. It's really amazing, because I get up. Normally have like my first appointment is available at like 5 a.m. in the morning. So I'm normally talking to people, you know, across the pond in the UK, or like Australia going to bed, or like Hawaii. It's, you know, like midnight, you know, there's a whole bunch of different people that I like talk to all across the globe, to try to be able to help them just raise awareness of what narcissism actually is. And that's kind of what we built Raw Motivations on, which is the 4 pillars of awareness, growth, healing, and change. That's like the guiding aspect of what we do as Raw Motivations, to help people understand and help people heal moving forward. So there you go.
you got that down pat.
Yeah, quite a story, man, for sure.
So I of course I have questions now.
Yeah.
I would say my first would be just it's kind of a personal one, but this is all personal. So, did your wife know about the affairs the entire time, or was that something she learned? Like, was there a big to-do that changed things?
Yeah, so my wife knew about the first affair a year after it happened. So so we had year 1 of marriage, affair was year 2. So basically the end of year 2, beginning of year 3, she knew about that affair. The rest of them, she didn't know about till, I'm going to lose track of my timeline, but she didn't know about those like till the very end. That's when she found out about the other 3. And then a couple months later, she found out about the 5th one.
Wow. I mean, let me tell you, so I had a friend not that long ago who had I never liked his wife. I mean, we just didn't get along.
Right.
Oil and water, you know. But he had a lapse of judgment and had an affair. It was very short. It was one time, but he did that. And I remember the one thing when he told me this, besides, you know, me automatically going, okay, I don't think badly of you. I'm not judging you. I still love you.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I hope you're going for forgiveness here with your wife. And he goes, oh yeah, well, she told me she would never leave me, and she's staying, and she's going to help me through this. And I'm like, I never felt more respect for that woman than when he told me that. And so your wife is, I would say, a very respectable person.
Yeah.
So
she's quite a badass to be able to put up with everything I've put her through, and still make the decision to, you know, come back. But I mean, there's also, you know, boundaries and stipulations that she decided before she even came back, of like, you know, if there's not changed behavior, then, you know, that month coming back is me packing and, you know, moving out. Because when she moved, it wasn't like hey, we're doing a separation. It was like she applied and took a job out of state. She moved out of state, you know, into her mom's house. She took our daughter. Like, it was a move. It wasn't just like you know, oh, I'm gonna, you know, visit for a couple of weeks. It was like, no, I'm gonna move, and I don't know if I'm, you know, coming back, or when I do, it's just gonna be to grab my stuff.
Yeah. Right. I had a question, actually. So with the you said early on, you know, with your relationship, it was always one after another. You know, it's going good. You have that kind of like honeymoon phase, even in dating, and then it kind of drops off, and you go to the next thing. And I guess the question I had was kind of like, how much of that do you think is due to the narcissistic personality disorder, and how much of that do you think, because I see this with a lot of people who are not narcissists as well, and I've talked about this before, I feel like a lot of what we have as a society or as a culture is this what do you call it? The one true love soulmate type lie that we believe all the time. So people are constantly going, oh, as soon as my relationship doesn't feel like a rom-com or doesn't feel like a Hollywood movie, well, then that must not be my one true love. And they kind of are looking for that always. So I feel like that's just something partially, at least societal, where it's like, oh, this doesn't feel good right now, so it must not be that Hollywood movie that I was promised.
Disney version that we're looking for, right?
Yeah. Do you think that's part of it that goes into your story, or?
Yeah, I would say, I think that's like part, I think that definitely comes into it. I think another aspect with it was also like the idea of, sorry, I like lost my train of thought there. I think that's like an aspect of it, as far as like you're looking for like ideal love, or you're looking for like that soulmate, or like that perfect person. But there's also like the aspect of growing up, what I experienced, and then what I realized in relationships that I was doing was my version of love, or what I thought was love, was also control. And so the other person having freedom, or the other person, like my idea sometimes of like, hey, if this person has freedom, then they're not going to keep picking me, or they're not going to keep coming back. So if I limit that freedom, then, they'll always still be mine. They'll always still come back. And so that's how, several of like the first like girlfriends and stuff like that, faded off really fast, because of the fact of like, they didn't like that aspect of like control, or even like clinginess, in one sense of like, hey, like he wants to know what's going on. He wants to know where I am, like that kind of stuff. I think was where it kind of like transitions a little bit more of being, controlling, but viewing that, twisting that in my mind of like, hey, control means that, yeah, I love this person, or them, being in communication with me, or, sharing the location, whatever it might be, that kind of a thing was, what I viewed as being like my version of love at that point.
Gotcha. Yeah.
So you talked about, did you say 7 lies?
Yes.
Okay. So could you walk me through what those were?
I'm gonna have to pull them up so I can actually like say them like word for word, because otherwise I will botch it. So it's been I'm actually coming up here on 3 years of being inside warrior, which is pretty awesome. And so it's been 3 years ago since I've done it. I've still kind of worked through it. I've still like gone through like several different things with it. So so there's 7 different lies that I had. So the first one here, lie number 1, I can do this on my own. Lie number 2, I am a good person. Lie number 3 was I deserve happiness. Lie number, where'd it go? Oh, there it is. Lie number 4 was God is not good enough for me. Lie number 5 was I am committed to Kayla. Lie number 6, I was in love with other women. And lie number 7, I can never win love.
That's very densely packed.
Yeah.
There's a lot there. So like it coming on the warrior challenge, the Wake Up Warrior challenge on like the last couple days, it's a lot more aggressive of some of the stuff that we're doing. And one of the things is you actually go on, multiple mile hike. And as you go, you take these rocks, and you have to pick up 7 different rocks and put them in your backpack as you go up a mountain, basically. And, while you're going, you're having to think through what are the costs of the lies that I have. So you go for a while, you sit down, you write stuff, you go for a while, sit down, write stuff of like, what are the costs of the lies? How much, how much money does it cost? How much time does it cost? How much effort, all different types of things. And then trying to get, deep down into like, what are the lies that you believe, and what are the things you actually have to, reconstruct in your life that actually you've built on a foundation of fiction versus a foundation of like reality.
So sorry, really quick, those 7 lies that you were talking about, those are 7 lies that you had to come up with through your time in the warrior, or
on my own. Like those are mine personally.
Does everybody have to do 7? Is that the
typically when I went through it, that was their criteria as far as like that's what they were. You had 7 rocks, you had to pick up each one, signifying like a lie that you're
sorry
believing.
I just wanted to clarify, because I think I might have just missed that part. So
no, absolutely.
Gotcha.
I don't want to dig in too deep. I don't want you to be uncomfortable, because apparently I'm a very empathetic person. But The one that really stuck out to me was God is not good enough for me.
That one
Can
stuck
you
out to me as well. I was curious about that.
can you walk me through how that lie worked and
Mhm.
what that meant for your life when you believed it?
Yeah. So like a big part in thinking through that and a big part in thinking like God is not good enough for me really comes down to the idea of not good enough for me to trust him with my life and with the direction I'm going, which also means not good enough of like, hey, like you screwed up my life, like you screwed up my life of giving me the wrong person. It's one of
Right.
these other people, but it's not my wife, because that doesn't work. That's the issue. Like God being good enough as far as like the idea of he's not either for me, he doesn't love me, or like the idea of like, hey, like no matter what I do, like I'm also not going to be good enough. And so like no matter, it was almost like the idea, and one of the things that attracted me to Warrior at the beginning was the fact that it wasn't biblically based at that point. Now it's actually changed since I've been a part of it. It's kind of cool. The main guy has actually like come to more realization, has been baptized, has changed curriculum and stuff. It's been really fascinating to see. But the beginning, like he was talking about, like I've been to church, I've done all this stuff, like nothing was working, and I resonated with that so much because I was like going through affairs, going through cycles, all this kind of stuff, and people just saying love God more didn't really do anything. Like it
Yep.
didn't
Right.
connect. So I was like, obviously, like something isn't working, or like this isn't good enough for me to actually adhere to this. And ultimately goes down to like that aspect of trust of like, unwilling to actually trust him with anything more than what I want to do, because I want to make sure that I'm getting that happiness. I deserve happiness. I'm doing all this stuff that I want to do to make sure that I have it, because if I trust him, it's not going to be the way I want it.
It
Right.
feels like a familiar lie that I've heard a lot of people say, and that I've even, at times believed myself, which is that I'm not good enough, which for God, which you kind of said was part of it as well. And I find it interesting because it seems like the result is the same. The result is, I'm not, either God's not good enough for me, he's not working, it doesn't work, he doesn't love me, or I'm not good enough for God, he can never love me. And either way, I'm just going to continue down this self-destructive path. So I
Mhm.
find that kind of interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, and I find part of that not necessarily towards like the God aspect, but a huge part in like survivors coming out of narcissistic abuse is I'm not good enough,
Right.
or like I wasn't worth enough, because they're attributing different value to that other person. And for me, there was a big aspect of like the narcissistic aspect of like I thought I was good enough, I thought I was the best thing ever, and everybody else was idiots, so it was one of those things that like I already had like a huge sense of ego, but it was that trust factor of like God isn't saving me, he's not stopping this, like I can't figure this out, like he's not, almost like he's not big enough in one sense, like big
Mhm.
enough to be able to solve the problems, or if I trust, like is going to screw me over.
Right. Well, and that's what's interesting is a lot of time I've had conversations with several different people recently who were talking about how they don't have faith or they don't understand faith or whatever. And one of the recurring things that I've had to say is faith is trust.
Hmm.
At its heart, it's trust. And the question is, do you trust him? Not is there this magical understanding and belief that you have? Is it
Right.
do you trust him?
Mhm.
And so I'm glad you brought up trust because it's like I don't think people make that connection all the time. For some reason that gets missed and I don't understand how.
And that was a huge aspect of me actually growing and changing, even with the self-awareness part. So like you have to think, like even after my wife came back, there's times I'm sitting in therapy being like, I hate this and I don't want this, like I'm still here, I'm still doing the stuff that I know I need to do, but like my heart wasn't always in it, and my heart was like, wait a second, like can I actually do this, like is there actually something better than what I'm thinking, because I was doubting that trust. And I actually wrote something down. Now that you mentioned the trust thing, I want to kind of like share that. I actually wrote something down. This is going back last year, be April. Let me see, April 23rd last year. And what I did is I was struggling with this. I was actually out in the woods, like walking around, like praying, and I was actually like trying to figure this out. I was like, this is like so frustrating. Of like, how do I actually get to the place of like trusting God? And it was something that I felt like I couldn't grasp. I couldn't hold on to. So I kind of like built this like equation, and I kind of like, I'll say it like backwards and hopefully it'll make sense. So like what I realized is a huge aspect is like I had to be able to have gratitude in order to be able to tap into joy, like gratitude leading to joy. I had to be able to have joy in order to lead to love. And then love ended up leading to no fear. No fear ended up leading to trust, and trust leading to give God all. And that's kind of like an equation that I like started like building together. And then I started realizing like, wait a second, the reason why, part of the fundamental reason why I can't even tap into trusting God is because I'm not even joyful. I don't even have like gratitude about who I am, about what he's done, and about like where I am in life. And so as a result, there's almost like, not necessarily just like a block, but there's almost like an idea of like a block of like, you can't, like, I don't think you can get to joy if you don't have like gratitude. So it's almost like building blocks that I kind of stumbled across in my own personal journey, that I was like, hey, if I'm going to get to this place, I actually need to learn how to do these basic things leading up to it.
Can you say that equation again real quick? Like sum it up again?
So gratitude leading to joy, joy leading to love, love leading to no fear leading to trust, and trust leading to give God all.
Gotcha. Yeah, no,
really, I really like how you're breaking things down so that you can grasp it personally, because I feel like there are people who just automatically get or understand things when they're in conversation, when they're taught, and then there are other people like, and it depends. I think everyone has some place in their life for this where they have to stop and recontextualize things so that they can actually grasp it. And that takes a level of self-awareness that I think a lot of people don't have. I just happened to be a navel-gazing teenager, like I'm very secure in me, which is dumb. It's wild how like very secure but insecure are like, it's like the poles, like it's two sides of the coin that I dealt with as a kid.
Yeah.
But here's what I wonder, or I feel like people need to understand, is you talk about how you make sure to bring awareness to narcissistic abuse and those who've dealt with it. In your own life, I see you've talked about cheating, which I think would obviously be a part of that. But what else does that look like? How does narcissistic abuse look for the person being abused? How do you realize that that's what's going on?
Yeah, so that's a huge part that a lot of people are confused about a lot of times, because you have, as a whole, you normally have like two types of narcissists. You have like overt and covert. The overt ones are a lot easier a lot of times, and those are the ones you typically think of as being like narcissistic, or like being like the big like assholes in one sense of how they're like treating different people. And with abuse, a lot of times it comes in different aspects where you have not just like physical abuse, that's a whole aspect, but then you also have mental and emotional abuse. And typically what you'll see is you'll see different aspects of the narcissist that'll try to distort reality in order to get what they're trying to do. So like how I normally describe it is, narcissists typically distort reality in three different ways. They do it with gaslighting. And so like trying to convince you, hey, what just happened didn't actually happen. Like you didn't see that. I didn't say that. Like I didn't actually do that. But it happened, and it plays to their head of like, wait a second, like you start to doubt yourself. That's where the self-confidence and the self-worth drops of like, okay, my gut isn't like wise enough to see what actually happened, because this person that I love and that's supposed to be loving me is telling me, no, that actually didn't happen. Then there's like distorting reality in like the present of like love bombing. And love bombing is like the overt praise, overt gifts. But the goal behind it really is not this like, oh, like I love you so much. It's to give you what you want in that moment, so you ignore the present stuff that's an issue. So like, let's say cheating, but let's say like, other stuff, like gambling, like whatever it might be that's causing attention in the relationship. Let me hide that by, piling on so many gifts you can't see the shit underneath, kind of a thing. And then there's with the three of them, then there's also future faking. And future faking is doing anything to be able to get you to look forward of like, I'm going to change, I'm going to get better, we're going to go on this trip, it'll be a great vacation, all this kind of stuff that there's no intention of happening. It's just, hey, let me get you to focus on that. So we stop focusing on me, of holding myself accountable or responsible, anything we can do to get past that. So those are like the three ways that narcissists, a lot of times I talk about, distort reality. But when we're talking about narcissistic abuse, it goes from there to like even more aspects, you know, from the gaslighting, all different types of things like that. But you have narcissists with like a high sense of ego, you know, the grandiose like thoughts and processes. You have a big sense of entitlement. You've got a lot of manipulation that goes into it, of expecting like immediate like response, or like a compulsion in one sense of like, hey, you're going to do what I want you to do. A huge one that a lot of times people like talk about is the idea of like lack of empathy, which my personal opinion is it's more like 50% that narcissists that actually don't have empathy. I think there's a lot of times that narcissists do have empathy, but it's the willing choice to not show it so that they don't have to feel responsible for what they just caused. So there's a whole nother aspect about that. And there's a couple other things, but like there's a lot of different things that go into it. That is why a lot of times people coming out of narcissistic abuse feel crazy, because they're like, I didn't know what was actually going on. And then all of a sudden you're talking about, you know, this example and you're like, oh my gosh, like that's exactly what I dealt with for, you know, 5-15 years kind of a thing.
Yeah.
So the lack of empathy is something that I have a hard time wrapping my mind around.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you realize that you lack empathy? And is it, I would ask, what does it feel like? But I'm guessing nothing, right? Like, how do you describe that? It's like trying to see out of your elbow. Like,
Right.
you
No,
can't
absolutely.
describe it. But
I think the difference is, you know, when we're talking like lack of empathy, it's like the idea of like something happens to someone else and other people are like, oh, I can like feel that, or I can see that. And like for a narcissist, something happens to someone else, unless it's happening to like me, it's like, okay, like there's no like feeling or thought there. So like, I don't know, like maybe like, you know, you're walking through the house and you stub your toe and it like really hurts really bad. You know, the other person might be like, dang, like that hurts. And I know that hurts because I've experienced that before. The narcissist, like, it doesn't even like phase them. It's like, why should I care? Because I don't have those emotions. I don't have those feelings. So like, give you an example. There's probably like, it's probably like 6 months ago now. My daughter was like we're learning how to like turn doorknobs and stuff like that. She's trying to get in one of the rooms, couldn't get the doorknob to work. Like she still couldn't get it. The door was stuck or whatever. And so, I mean, she's like two and a half at this point. She just like got frustrated, kind of like reared back her head and just like hit the door kind of thing. And so, and then she starts crying because, you know, she just hurt her head. And, you know, my first thought is like, well, what'd you expect? And
Right.
so like the difference there is like, you know, other people will be like, oh my gosh, like you're crying, like you're hurt, like that kind of a thing. That's not something that's typically like innate. And so for me, coming into the picture is more like working on, you know, cognitive of like what's actually cognitive empathy and how do I practice that? How do I do the reps? Not so that I'm faking it, but I'm knowing, hey, this is what I need to do in order to connect with this person or to help them through whatever they're going through.
right. So like for as a silly example, so it's like, you know, you're scrolling on TikTok and you see a guy get hit in the nuts, or he falls off and he breaks his leg.
Mhm.
And like I have like phantom pain in my leg or my crotch region. Is
Right.
that something you experience or no?
No.
Okay. See, that's a connection that I can understand.
Yeah.
There we go.
Yeah.
Awesome.
So yeah,
Okay.
it doesn't really connect on that level.
Dude.
Maybe that's why there's so many surgeons that people claim are narcissists, because they can actually like cut someone open and just like, yeah, that's cool. Like, whereas if I watch it, I'm like, ugh. It's like almost you can feel it. I was curious though, like for like a less like extreme example, just out of curiosity, if something like in a relationship, a big part of it is you want to be heard and seen by your partner, right? So like in a relationship, it might be, hey, this is important to me and I want to share it with you.
Mhm.
And it's just something I've experienced in the past. Like, hey, I want to share this with you. And they're like, yeah, but I'm not interested. I don't care. Like, it doesn't mean anything to me. So like they have zero. Would that be like a good example of like a more like a mundane example of
Yeah, that'd be like if we're talking the narcissist world, like that would be a little bit more on the lines of like, say, like an overt narcissist that's just gonna be like, no, I don't care about you. Like I don't care what you have to bring to the table. Like,
Right.
it doesn't matter. It doesn't affect me. You know, for someone that might be even on like the covert side, they might listen and never respond, or they might listen and not care, or they might listen and use what you're actually communicating, your vulnerabilities, as a way to be able to dog whistle you or to be able to trigger you later down the road, because now they know what makes you tick.
Gotcha.
Speaking of gaslighting, I mean, I know that this is a concept that came from the title of a movie, which is kind of funny.
Right.
But boy, did it have a big surge in popularity in using the phrase within the last few years. I mean, it was wild watching people on television say Donald Trump is gaslighting me, and I'm
Mhm.
like, he's never spoken to you, and you're just telling the world that you feel crazy. So
Mhm.
what is going on here?
Right.
But what's interesting about that is it seems like more often than not, when people use the term gaslighting, it seems to me that they're misusing it. Is that something that
Mm.
you've noticed, or something that would bug you or gets in your way at all, or has the understanding helped?
I would say for gaslighting in particular, I would say no, that's not something I've noticed as much. I would say as far as like stuff that people misunderstand or misconstrue, really like in the narcissistic world, I would say would come down to really like narcissists in general, and then also reactive abuse. I think those are the two things that a lot of times people get confused on. So like with narcissism and narcissists as a whole, like it does get overused. I think you kind of mentioned at the beginning, like it does get overused, and people define that and do that, like say that like all the time, like, oh, that's just a narcissist kind of thing without knowing. Like
Right.
some people will look like, oh, well, like, my person cheated on me like multiple times. It doesn't mean they're a narcissist, because even, a cheating is not one of the 9 characteristics that actually makes up a narcissist. You have to have 5 out of the 9 characteristics to be classified as a narcissist or have NPD per the DSM-5. And so a lot of times people, they're like, oh, like, they're a liar and they're a cheater. That makes them a narcissist. Like, no, not really. There's more things that have to actually, go with that criteria.
Would you mind going through the 9 with us? I know
Yeah,
that
no, absolutely.
that's asking probably for you to look something up, but
No, I mean, I have it pulled up, so you're totally fine. So
awesome.
I normally have it with me, and I made sure to pull it up right now because I filmed this at night at home, and I have other stuff in my office and all. But yeah, so yeah, we can go through them. You want me to read through all 9?
Yeah, that'd be
Yeah,
great.
cool.
And I'll tell you by the end if PJ is a narcissist or not.
Sounds good. Sounds good. We can self-diagnose. That's what we
4 out of 9. 4 out of 9.
what we
Okay,
claim not to do. Yeah.
borderline.
Honestly, sometimes when I talk to a narcissist, when I'm going through and like we want to dive into them, I don't say up front, "Hey, you need to have 5 out of 9," because they'll do that. They'll be like,
Mm.
"Oh yeah, I only identified with 4." I actually had one appointment a while ago.
I
I
think
do
Ben just
some
called me a
couples.
narcissist.
I do some couples, and I had a guy who was like textbook of everything I'm talking through, like narcissist, like going through, like he actually like in front of my face, he gaslit his wife about the conversation. It was incredible. That was probably the most I've ever like cussed in a session ever because I was like pissed. But he looked at me and he was like, "All right, well, let's go through them. Like, tell me the 9. Tell me the 9." I was like, "No." I was like, "Do your own dang research," because I was like, I'm not going to tell you the 9, so you can half identify with 2, identify with 1, and then be like, "Oh, I'm not this," kind of thing. So
Right.
that's just a random side note. But all right, narcissistic personality disorder. It's got 9 different traits. Okay, and so the kind of opening thing of it is a pervasive pattern of grandiosity and fantasy or behavior, need for admiration, lack of empathy, beginning by early adulthood, and present in a variety of contexts, as indicated by 5 or more of the following. Number 1, has a grandiose sense of self-importance. So example, exaggerates achievements and talents, expects to be recognized as superior without I can never say it, without the commensurate achievements. So I just say without those achievements because it's a lot easier every single time. All right, number 2 is preoccupied with fantasies of unlimited power, success, brilliance, beauty, or ideal love. Number 3 believes that he or she is special and unique and can only be understood or should associate with other special or high status people or sometimes institutions. Number 4 requires excessive admiration. Number 5 has a sense of entitlement. So, example is unreasonable expectations of especially favorable treatment or automatic compliance with his or her expectations. Number 6 is interpersonally exploitative. So, it takes advantage of others to achieve his or her own ends. Number 7 lacks empathy, is unwilling to recognize or identify with the feelings and needs of others. That's why I also kind of differentiate that I think half of them have, half of them don't. Number 8 as well is often envious of others or believes that others are envious of him or her. And number 9 shows arrogant, haughty behaviors or attitudes.
Gotcha.
So, how many of those did you connect with? I feel like you said it earlier, but I can't remember.
I don't think I did. So you're good. All at one point or another, all 9.
Okay.
All 9 have been something. It was even something I came home one day when I was talking through it with a therapist, because I mean it took multiple months, took a period of time before my therapist was even
Uh-oh.
identified with all
Did we
these.
lose him? Oh, you're back. You're back.
It was months until what?
It was months until like my therapist, actually would say, or like came to the conclusion, because he has to go over a period of time. It's not like you can just be like, oh yeah, you're a narcissist kind of thing. And I remember like I came home and I was like, oh look, I identified with all these. And I think I listed out like 7, and like the other 2 I didn't list out. And Kayla was like, well, yeah, but with those 2, what about this? And I was like, oh yeah. I was like, yeah. So yeah, I've at one point or another I've identified with all of them to some degree or another.
Gotcha. Man, so I think that it's hard because, I don't relate to many of those, but it seems like for me personally, I had, like I said, it's the insecurity and the security on, it's like a coin, both sides of a coin.
Mhm.
But what's interesting about that is through, um, through my mom just
I see your mom in the chat.
she just threw off my thoughts. What was I saying? Oh, for different reasons, I have some insecurity. I have some different things like that, low self-esteem in different areas, but I'm like a very fake it till you make it kind of person.
Mhm.
And so, and I do things and I work on things I want to work on. But sometimes that leads to me sounding cocky, I think. And so I always worry, oh, does that mean I'm a narcissist? Because I'm like this, because I've heard someone, it's like, oh yeah, it's someone who doesn't really think that highly of themselves, but really thinks highly of, and I'm like, is that me?
Right.
Narcissist? I don't want to be.
Right.
So when it comes to the abuse, when it comes to you helping um, other people who are narcissistic, is this something that how many people do you end up talking to? Are they coming to you? Is their wife sending them to you? Like how is that part of it work?
Yeah, so to give kind of like full picture, out of everybody that I see, there's probably about 5% that are narcissists, mainly because they don't want to. There's not like that aspect of being either self-aware, of wanting to admit the stuff that's actually inside, and especially wanting to admit that to someone else. So 95% of the people that I see are narcissistic abuse survivors, or people that are trying to make sense of the crazy making. They're looking for that clarity, or they're looking for that closure as they come out of it, kind of a thing. The people that I do see that are narcissistic or narcissist, or some that I've talked to for a while and passed off, or recommended, gotten rid of to a therapist or something like that, and seen bigger diagnosis come out. I'm like, phew, past that one. Some of those that I've seen, is like a 5% of what I work with, and then probably out of that, people that typically come back after the first one is probably closer to like 1% of like actual like narcissistic, or maybe like 0.5, because it's very, very small. I do have people that be like, like my girlfriend, my ex-girlfriend sent me your videos and said I should book with you. And they're just doing to check the box. Like they're just doing to be like, oh, like all this, or you'll find the person that all they want during an appointment is they just want like, do you think I'm a narcissist? Do you think I'm a narcissist? Do you think I'm a narcissist? And I'm like, I'm not telling you that, because I can tell how they're going through it, that they just want to be like, oh, I talked to a narcissist. He said I wasn't a narcissist, so therefore, and they're just going to go back and they're going to gaslight the person that they, that just broke up with them, or like anything like that.
Well, that's the problem with the term gaslighting, is because it was when it was kind of introduced to the public, it was not introduced in a deep way, or in a way that like really shows what it is and how it can hurt.
Mhm.
And so like one of my things was I think it's funny. I'm a prankster. I think it's funny to
Mhm.
do different things. And one of the things that I did to my late father was one time we were in the house, and he had gone to bed, and he took NyQuil every night. Um, I don't know why. I don't know if it helped him sleep or what. But he took NyQuil every night. And one day morning, he woke up and the NyQuil was in the fridge. And he was like blaming every single person except for himself for putting this in the fridge.
Mhm.
And so me being a prankster, every single time after he'd go to bed from that point on, I would put it into the fridge just to see how he would
Right.
react or whatever. And
Mhm.
like I would occasionally, my wife was like, "You gaslit me." I was like, "No, I didn't. I just pretended that you weren't talking for the whole time you were talking because I thought it was funny to go, oh, that's a weird thing to say out of the blue." Like, I just think that's funny.
Right.
And so when you have done any form of like legitimate gaslighting,
Mhm.
what has that looked like? I mean, how does it help you to do that? Is it just a control?
It's a control factor, typically going back to image, of how I want to appear, how I want to look. So, like, probably the easiest aspect in the relationships that I was in and in like the affairs and stuff like that was like gaslighting my wife about what she was seeing, thinking, and feeling about recognizing that, hey, there's inappropriate relationships going on between him and someone else, whether that was like seeing stuff or texts or like, times or places, stuff like that, and convincing her that everything that she was feeling and thinking wasn't valid and wasn't legitimate. Because I mean, that's ultimately where we get, go back to the movie of like gaslighting, of like thinking like, wait, like, is this actually my reality? Like, no, like you're actually looking at like a different reality. And so being able to convince her like, no, what you just saw of, me spending time with this person, or, a text that seemed like more sexual, like that wasn't real. Like that wasn't actually what we were doing, or that was a joke, or, anything like that, to try to reduce like her gut or her idea of, wait, I think something's actually wrong.
Do you think part of that is just to like save yourself from an uncomfortable situation, or is it to justify it to yourself?
That's a good question. I think it's both. So I think there's an aspect of, I want to be able to justify it to myself, because ultimately, I would say it this way: ultimately, the first person that the narcissist has to gaslight, and we're talking about like changing reality, is
Hmm.
themselves. They have
Yeah.
to be able to say like, "Hey, what I'm doing, I know I shouldn't be doing, but I'm going to twist it around in my mind to say that it's okay to do because of my ego, because of my entitlement. It's okay if I do this because they obviously should comply with my needs." So like there's an aspect of like knowing that, having to justify that to myself, and the whole idea, like I mentioned, of distorting reality is like, let me do this so that it doesn't shine back on me. Because if it shines back on me, there's an opportunity that it might actually expose like vulnerability, shame, guilt, and some of those are huge aspects that narcissists is typically like running from or trying to hide.
So with gaslighting yourself first, as you said, is that part of the reason why you think you only see 5% of people who are actually narcissists? You think it's like just extremely hard for them to get around that barrier to actually like recognize what they're doing to
And I
themselves?
think it's
Like,
hard to get around the barrier of being honest with who they actually are,
yeah, that's what I was.
because I had a time like with my therapist. I went through I was going through, I was actually, I don't know, it was like a year ago or something like that, but I was going through Psychopath Free, a book that I was actually like reading and using even for content and stuff like that. And I got to the section that was talking about how narcissists, psychopaths, everything like that, how they groom their victims. And I like read through that chapter, and like I had to set the book down, because I was like, I didn't think that was the stuff that was in there. I was like, that's stuff that I did. And I didn't realize that some of that stuff, because in my mind, like I mentioned before, like love was control. And so, like, if I
Mhm.
was controlling another person, then there was an aspect that I thought I was being loving. So there's different aspects of that I was like, holy cow. And I started revealing more stuff, and we started doing more inner work. And I remember sitting in her office and being like, I'm struggling with the thought. And it was like whenever I read that, it was like 2, 3 weeks that was like rough, like really rough, just like mentally for me. And I was like sitting there, I was like, I'm struggling with the thought of, who am I? Am I the man, or am I the monster? And like having to sit with like that paradox in one sense. She even said like, the fact that you're even sitting with that paradox, being a narcissist, is amazing. You haven't already run out of the room. Because she was like, being able to even sit with that concept is very like polarizing for someone who is shame avoidant and is always trying to run from that, or to build walls or to build masks to be able to avoid actually having that accountability that shows back to myself the shame that's inside. And I'll never forget what she said. It was like, it was wonderful and awful at the same time. I was like, am I the man or the monster? And she looked right back at me and she was like, maybe you're both. And I was like, how's that supposed to help me? But I mean, there's been a lot of stuff that we've worked through since then, and I'm grateful for everything she's done to be able to try to help me understand that. As far as like, maybe there is an aspect of both sides of you in there. There's both sides that have done those things, and there's also upbringing. There's also the habits. There's also the different things that have happened. That if you put someone in that situation, or like for instance, if it put me in that situation, maybe I was the man, but I was acting as the monster because of those different things that I'd already been used to, or the habits that I'd formed.
This is all so interesting to me.
Yeah.
So I had a question and I can't remember what it was, so I'm going to ask Cody's. My buddy Cody, who is going to be one of my future guest co-hosts, said narcissist is one of those words like pedophile, in that the psychological disposition gets confused with the behavior. But obviously you're trying to figure out ways to not let the disposition lead you to immoral behavior. Have you found that you get a lot of judgment just for acknowledging the disposition?
Yeah, so like just acknowledging being a narcissist kind of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say a decent amount. I definitely don't get as much flack as like Lee Hammock, Mental Healness, on like TikTok and stuff like that. I mean, but he also has like 1.5 million. He definitely gets like a lot more flack. He was actually sharing stuff with me today. There's actually, I think it's on Reddit. There's actually like posts and like whole like threads like dedicated to like, F. Lee Hammock and like all this kind of stuff that's like people like coming out. And a lot of times you have a lot of narcissists that come after him, being like he's stigmatizing or he's being mean to us, all that kind of stuff. And for me, I'm just telling it like it is. This is who I am. And if I'm stigmatizing or if I'm bringing up stuff that isn't true, well, there's a heck of a lot of people that are out there that are saying this is exactly the same thing that my husband or that my wife like put me through.
I find that super fascinating because one of the first thoughts I had when Cam asked me to be on this episode and told me who you were, and I was looking at what you do with Raw Motivations, is that in our society it seems like there's a real acceptance of just being like, hey, this is what I am. This is my self-prescribed personality disorder, and isn't it great and wonderful, and praise me. And what you're doing seems to be entirely opposite. You're not only taking on a very honest doctor prescribed or whatever you would call it. You're saying, hey, this is something that's not good about me. This is something that I want to change. This is how I want to help people. So it seems to be just completely counterculture to be like, not only am I recognizing something real about myself, and instead of trying to just score points with it and be like, feel sorry for me or whatever, get my Instagram, TikTok points.
Right.
You're actually saying there's something that can be done about it. There's something that's not good about it, and I want to change that. And I think you think that's where a lot of the attacks of stigmatization come from and things like that.
Yeah, I think you normally, I'll never forget it. I forget. I think it was off the top of my head, I want to say it was like Keith Hackney. I think that like actually said this quote. I stumbled across a reel of his, and it was like he said this idea of like, hey, like, don't you see like all the people you're pissing off? Well, not the people I'm helping.
Right.
Like when it comes down to it, like there's gonna be people that are mad at the message I'm putting out there because I'm exposing stuff that they don't want to be exposed in. And ultimately, like people that like watch my channel that are stuck with an abusive person and they leave that person, there's an aspect that those people get pissed off because that aspect just like outed, some of the behaviors and some of the things that's going on. So I definitely do have, and honestly, like I have more. Let's see. I would say I have more hate sometimes from unhealed people than I would say I do from narcissists currently. I'm sure that'll change as my platform grows, but I have more people that will come out of the woodwork trying to bash me and what I'm doing. Well, he's in it to get supply, he's in it to get money, he's in it to pick up other women, like whatever it is. Like they'll put anything out there to try to like shame what I'm doing, and I'm like, okay, like if that's what you want to do, like watch and learn. Like I had someone on my platform, I think like a couple of weeks ago, like actually like say something just about like, oh, well, they're always just in it for the supply, or he's just doing it like for clout and stuff like that. And like never trust a narcissist, never like believe in narcissists and stuff like that. And I'm like, hey, I'm not asking you to trust me. If you don't want to trust me, like there's a ton of other coaches, a ton of other therapists that can help you, but I'm telling you how it is. And I'm telling you how it's real for me. If that ends up being something, to be able to help you along your journey, then I'd love to be able to help in that way.
Yeah, absolutely.
I don't know if you saw that.
Mom.
Yeah, my mom. That's my mother. So I remember my question. In your opinion, what would you say is the difference? Is there a real difference between lying to get out of trouble or lying to minimize consequence and gaslighting? So, say um, your wife sees you texting a girl and it got a little flirty, but it wasn't sexual or something like that.
Mhm.
And you tell her, you say, oh, no, it wasn't anything like that at all. There was not even any flirting. Is that gaslight? What's the big difference there? Because I mean, it is trying to change what she saw, but
Right. Yeah, so I see where you're going with that. I think in that aspect, like if we use that specific example, I would lean more to the idea of like lying, versus it being like gaslighting, because gaslighting for me, what I see is more like an actual shift in reality that the other person has to believe. Give you an example. Husband and wife were arguing in the kitchen. They had a home security system, so there's a camera in the kitchen. He said something and she's like, I can't believe you just said that to me. And his immediate response was, I didn't say that. Okay, so first idea was like, okay, it's like lying, like he's just denying that it actually happened. He's like, no, I didn't say that. So she pulls up the iPad, pulls up, runs back the video, and plays the video, and he's like, I didn't say that. And she's like, no, like it shows right here. You said X, Y, and Z. And he's like, I didn't say that. He had her so convinced that she actually had to take the video to friends and family, play it for them, and be like, what did you hear? Because she was doubting her own reality, because he was so sure of himself that he was saying, like, that never happened. You're imagining it. You're putting words in my mouth, but I never said that. She had to actually go to other people to validate that she wasn't crazy, because he was making her believe something that did happen to make her believe that it did.
gotcha.
Do you think that do you think that's something that person actually has convinced themselves fully they didn't say, even after watching a video like that? Do you think like the self delusion can be that strong, or?
I think it can be, if you practice it enough.
Mm.
If you practice it enough, and that's why honestly, I think as narcissists age and as narcissists like do more narcissistic things, as they get a very adept at lying and changing their reality, other people's reality, I think there's aspects that it does affect memory, and it does cause different like memory gaps. I think that that's smaller than what the narcissist want you to say. Like, I don't remember all that stuff. A lot of times they do, but it's all goes back to shame avoidance. So like in that moment, like, I know I just did this. So let me put it this way. Like, hey, so like in using the same example, hey, I know I said that, but if I admit that, then I actually have to admit in that moment that I'm wrong. Being
Right.
wrong is a bigger hill to die on than it actually is to like own up to something that I actually said. So I'd rather gaslight the person. I'd rather convince them that they're crazy than I would actually admit that I'm wrong, because that's going to pull out more stuff inside me that I don't want to deal with. So like when you think of what we talk about would be shame, vulnerability, guilt. So when you think of it, guilt is I did something bad. And then it leads immediately to shame of I am bad. And so the narcissist, it jumps really quick of like, they don't really have remorse. They don't really have guilt, because it jumps so fast to what just happened means it's a direct reflection of me. And I can't handle that. That's not something that I'm willing to acknowledge, which is why, for the first like 7 years of our marriage, like there was a lot of times I would never even be able to physically say I was wrong. Like that was almost like a mental block of like, if I say that, that's actually admitting that I'm not the perfect person that I think. And so like I couldn't, like the words never would come out. Like I think the closest I ever got during that period of time is like maybe I was like less right, but it was never like I was actually wrong. And so like there's a huge aspect of not wanting to admit that, which I'll tie it in really quick to empathy. I mentioned a couple of times, like I think a lot of times people are like, oh, that person has no empathy, they're a narcissist. Well, not all narcissists are devoid of empathy. I think
Sometimes
there's a
they're
lot of
psychopaths.
narcissists. I think there's a lot of narcissists out there that have empathy, but the switch is choosing to be able to acknowledge. And so that's one thing that I like in the DSM-5, that it actually says lacks empathy, and then it goes on to say is unwilling to recognize or identify with the feelings and needs of others. How I normally explain that is I just did something that hurt my wife, and she's sitting across the room, she's crying, she's upset. In that moment, I know, hey, if I go over there and give her a hug, that'll make her feel better, and that's also portraying and showing empathy. The problem is if I walk over there and give her a hug, what I'm doing is I'm validating her feelings, which means I'm validating her reasoning of why she's crying, which means that reasoning comes back to it being my fault. And so it's a lot easier to stand there, let her cry, because that means I'm not acknowledging that I'm at fault.
Wow.
This is yeah. Well, it's interesting is when you talk about different mental illness or even just neurological differences, people really love to put people in very strict boxes of understanding how they are or what they should be. And I'm sure it's all very different. I have two questions to ask before I forget it again. Because I'm ADHD. But one of my questions was you said something about how it would break down the concept of you being perfect in your mind.
Mhm.
So, very simple question: did you believe you were perfect?
I thought it was the best. Yeah.
Okay. God, I want to be a narcissist. That sounds great, man.
Sounds better than struggling with self-doubt day in, day out like I do.
But I mean, it's like you mentioned, it's like two sides of the same
Yeah.
coin, though, because it's the same aspect of like, I'm the best, but I still have to hide my shame. I have to make sure I'm portraying that and that I'm believing that, even though there's still in the back of your mind of like, okay, but then why do I have to put a mask up? Why do I actually have to hide from that? If I actually was the best, I wouldn't have to hide from that. I could actually be authentic with who I actually am. But instead, I'm putting up a mask to be able to appear that way, even though, I'm doing shady stuff on the side or lying over here or cheating over here, like whatever it might be. There's still that. And that's why one of my lies was, I'm committed to Kayla.
Yeah.
That was a lie that I put in my head of like, hey, I'm committed to Kayla because I'm going to work, I'm paying the bills, I'm showing up, I'm providing a roof overhead. Oh yeah, and I'm still cheating. But like what I wanted to acknowledge was I only want to acknowledge I'm committed to Kayla because I'm doing that. But that's a tiny portion of what actually commitment is.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. So the other question, so like I said, people like to put people with differences in boxes.
Mhm.
And so one of the things that I find, because I used to be really into true crime and I listened to all sorts of stuff like that. And it always drove me crazy. And you can tell me if I'm wrong and it shouldn't drive me crazy. But there's this push in destigmatizing any form of mental illness uh, to the point where if someone talks about someone who shot up a bunch of children or whatever, they say, no, he wasn't mentally ill. He was dot, dot, dot. Don't stigmatize the mentally ill. And I
Mhm.
look at that and I go, there's no way you're not ill mentally if you shoot children.
Right.
Like I don't know how you could not speak of it as illness or health in any way.
Mhm.
And so
Right.
it's one of those things that's kind of driven me crazy because it's like we need to be able to talk about these things in such a way that we're honest, but that we're also, not, I don't know, trying to hurt people. I don't think people with bipolar disorder are going to go on killing sprees, and no one thinks that's what you mean when you say this
Right.
person was mentally ill. But am I crazy?
No, I don't think so. I mean, so give you kind of like maybe a side or a complementary example with that. I had a video on TikTok I did. Gosh, it's probably been like probably a year ago now. And someone asked me a question about BPD, borderline personality disorder.
Yeah.
Part of my story that I actually forgot to say, I had all that like prepared, but I forgot to say part of my story was the fourth affair was actually with a girl with BPD and narcissistic traits. And so a lot of that was reflected back on me. And I was like, holy cow, this is some of the stuff that I do. Like, where'd you learn that? That kind of thing. And
Right.
so like someone asked me a question and I went on TikTok and I answered their question by reading off the DSM-5 borderline traits. And I don't think maybe I said it's the DSM-5, but all I did is I just read through them. I just like boom, boom, boom. And I had so many people come out of the woodwork, like bashing me and coming attacking me, being like, that's not what borderline is. That's not what borderline is. And I'm like, I'm literally just reading from the DSM. Like I didn't make any judgments. I didn't say any statements. I literally just read from the DSM-5. And it was ironic because some of their like overt, like, I can't believe you do this, all this kind of, I'm like, borderline, as far as like how they're reacting, but there's a big aspect of like just because you're borderline or just because you're a narcissist or stuff like that doesn't mean you're trapped in that box of
Right.
being the worst person ever, because there's still a daily choice. Now, granted, is that choice harder, 30 years down the road than it is, 20 years down the road, or it's harder, 60 years down the road than it is 30 years? Yeah, absolutely. Because habits, habits are a huge aspect of it, of like, it's so habitual to hide and to run, at that point, it's just, there's no point, there's no way to almost get in one sense, because it's so habitual, so ingrained. But like, everybody makes that choice. And I think a lot of times people want to use personality disorders and use different aspects of like, oh, well, that's who I am, so I can't change, or I can't get better, or you just have to accept me for what I am. Well, that doesn't mean I have to accept your abuse. That doesn't mean I have to accept you being an asshole or being a cheater or stuff like that. Like, just because, and you find that a lot of times with narcissists that will actually either self-diagnose or want to say like, oh, I'm not a narcissist, I just have a sex addiction, because then they can justify why they want it so much. Then they can justify, you need to give it to me because this is who I am. When in reality, sometimes it's not even that. It's just that is a lot of times the sedation or the outworking of sometimes narcissistic personality.
To what you were saying, Cam, do you mind if I ask a question real quick?
Go for it.
Yeah. So what you were saying, as far as we can't stigmatize people as kind of like one push, and the other push is, there's definitely people out there that are like, well, if anybody has any type of mental disorder, bipolar, they're going to shoot up somebody. We should red flag law or whatever. You've got like these two opposite ends of this. I wonder if we're in another one of those moments that's kind of like, it reminds me of the 80s with the satanic panic idea. Right. And I find it funny because anytime people bring up the 80s and the satanic panic, they're like, oh, look, they were stigmatizing kids that played D&D as cultists, Satanists, whatever. Isn't that silly? But then on the other hand, you had the Son of Sam murders. You had like all of these cults that were actually satanic going around and like murdering people and doing stuff like this. So I just find this like balance to be interesting in this same way, where it's like what Ben's doing, you have to talk about it. You actually have to get people help. You can't, so destigmatize it that no one ever talks about it. It just stays buried under the rug and continues the cycles of abuse. And on the other hand, it can't be like the red flag law of like, hey, I'm afraid to come out and ask for help because I'm going to lose my rights. Right. So I find that kind of I don't know if there's a question there, but
that's sometimes where people will come after me or Lee being like, oh, you're stigmatizing or you're shaming narcissists. And, I'm very emphatic a lot of times on my videos, or I'm very like in your face sometimes, because sometimes that's what it takes for people to realize like, hey, just so you know, like the person you just got out of a relationship that is a narcissist, they don't care about you. And like that's like, whoa, like people like, I can't believe that. Well, like, yeah, because it's not about you, it's all about them. And that's all that it's ever been. So there's sometimes that I come pretty strong in videos, but I'm also the first to jump on that bandwagon when, someone emails me is like, hey, I think I'm a narcissist. I'm like, hey, let's talk. Because if there's any chance to help build that awareness and help you actually understand, and my goal isn't to heal narcissists, because I'm not going to be able to do that. I can't change anybody. But if I can like actually have them come into my life and be like, hey, this is what helped me, this is how I want to be able to help you. And we see some of those doors open where, it makes more awareness. It opens them up to the possibility of actually, hey, you can step out into the light and be the person that you actually are. Not abusive, but you can say, hey, I own these things, and this is my plan to actually work on helping not be that way, or helping not be abusive, or helping to be a better person than what I've exemplified.
So let me other question. I don't know why I have to say that. Obviously, it's going to be a question. I'm going to end it with my voice going up just a little bit, so you
right.
We'll put a question mark on the teleprompter.
Yeah, a virtue. Yeah. But I have kind of two. Do you think you talked about how you were raised by an evangelist, and you were always moving around doing that? Do you think there is or was a spiritual component to your narcissism insofar as like some sort of spiritual sickness in some sense, or do you think it's a physical or just mental situation?
So I think I kind of shy away from some of the aspect of like spiritual sickness per se. And then sometimes people like dive into like, narcissists or demons, like, all kinds of stuff.
Yeah,
like,
not that.
We go the whole spectrum. Yeah. But I think there's a big aspect of, I think it's like two answers to your question. So I think part of growing up, contributed to narcissistic behavior because of being detached from anything solid, and then also early on being detached from primary caregiver. So like 2 weeks after I was born, I was on the road, and my parents like were in churches, singing, preaching, doing like, Bible schools, Sunday schools, like all different types of stuff. So there's an aspect of, even when I was like super young, there wasn't always a ton of attachment because I was getting shuffled like nurseries and like on the pew, stuff like that. So like, I don't think it was not like I was like abandoned, I don't have like that aspect, but there is an aspect of disconnection from the primary caregiver early on can actually physically affect some of the gray matter that's being formed, that affects like your empathy, like different aspects of that. So there's parts of that. When it comes down to it, the other part of growing up in, it's probably gonna be a three-part question, actually, three-part answer. The other part is the Christianity and the religion aspect is a lot of times how it's portrayed, especially in like Southern Baptist culture or more conservative culture, things like that, is like you got to get cleaned up before you're accepted by God, or you got to look a certain way, you got to fit the part. And so like there's an aspect of going church to church and like doing the things we did, like being I've been all three: an evangelist kid, a pastor's kid, and a missionary's kid. So I've actually been all three.
You've got all the disorders
going on.
Oh,
And so, like doing stuff like that, it's like, hey, you got to, this is who we're supposed to be. Like people are looking at us. You have to set the example. You have to be that way. So it's like, don't forget your last name. Don't forget who you are, and all that kind of stuff. That's another kind of like pressure in one sense too. And then on the other like spiritual aspect of what I would say narcissism is, I think when you see a narcissist in the flesh, like doing everything that they do, a lot of times I don't view that being more of like a spiritual aspect, except for that person just being let go to do their own way and their own sinful nature, and that's just going to be how it exemplifies. So you see like people all over the world, like crazy, like awful people, like psychopaths, sociopaths, stuff like that, that in reality, like I don't think those people have to be spiritually sick or possessed by demons or anything like that. I just think they have to be let loose of, if everything's okay for me to do, then we've seen humanity go down some of the darkest places because of that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I don't know if he was a narcissist or a psychopath, but I had one very close encounter with someone who tried to manipulate me, and tried to, even though he was married, tried to steal away my wife and tried to gaslight her. And I'm sitting there and I'm watching it,
Wow.
and I'm going, no, what are you talking about? No.
Right.
And there was, I won't go too far into it, but it's wild when you see something like that, because it's so different than what a normal person might experience. It feels demonic in some sense when someone's trying that hard, at least when you can see it,
Right.
to manipulate at that level, and it's
Mm-hmm.
terrifying. So that's that. I just didn't know if so when I say spirit, I didn't know how else to put it, but I just mean like, do you feel like that's something that plays into it, is spirituality, and you're saying it's just going full on into the
Yeah, I mean, I
sinful
think
nature.
it touches on. I mean, if we use the term of like spiritual sickness, I mean, at the end of the day, that's just man's own depravity.
Right. Okay. The other question I had was, you went through your story, but do you remember any times when you were a child where was there any crystallizing moment when you feel like you became perfect or anything like that, or was there ever a time before where you didn't feel that way and then later you did?
It's a good question. Um, what I would say, well, actually, I would say two things. One, going back to childhood, is muddied and is really
Yeah.
hard to be able to piece together. So, like, even in like therapy, trying to do like inner child work, stuff like that. Like we had a moment where we were trying to go back, and my therapist was like, think of it like a picture of you at a younger age. You could tell me what age, whatever, and I was like, I can't. I was like, I don't know. And then I finally like latched onto one, and I was like, I don't know if what the picture of me that I'm viewing is my own memory, or is a memory that's been told to me, or is a picture that I know exists that I'm attributing it to. So like
Right.
that whole part is like kind of crazy. We've also, I call my therapist crazy because one, she's amazing, but then two, like whenever we hit a wall, she's like, hey, let's try this brand new thing, or hey, let's try something completely different. So like we touch on a lot of stuff that I term as like being crazy. We're talking about like muscle response therapy, like EMDR, EMI.
Is that the one with the light?
Yeah, like EMI and EMDR a lot of times have like the movements that you're like following. EMDR you'll either do like the eye stuff as far as like with lights or with movement, or you'll do you kind of hold almost like Nintendo Switch like controllers, and they like vibrate back and forth kind of a thing.
Okay.
My therapist also does like energy work. She also is a Christian. So there's a lot of like things that she brings to the table that's like different than, just one stream of therapy in one sense.
Right.
And I remember we did a session. It was muscle response therapy, coupled with some of the stuff that she does. It's forget the exact name. Some of the stuff she does is called like Splunkna. It's like there's different aspects with religion and with God that's brought into it, where we invite God into the session to actually work through it. It's wild sometimes. And we've done it 3 times, and each time it's like kind of blown my mind. We did one that actually she's like going through, and it's really interesting because like you put out your arm and she like asks a color or question and like presses down to see your body's response. And that's when your body starts telling on you, where it responds differently, even if your mind isn't responding differently or your words aren't responding differently. And she went back to something, and she was like, okay, it's identifying what we need to work on through like series of questions is when you work on 0 to birth. And I was like, huh? Like 0 to birth? Like I heck sure like don't remember anything like before I was actually born. But it actually like kind of went through the aspect of there being an aspect in my mind that I needed, that there was a expectation that was placed on me before I was born, and that my thought process was the idea of like I have to break the mold. I have to like be better, do better. Like I have to see where the bar is of achievement, and I have to pass that kind of a thing.
Gotcha.
And it was fascinating because then, going out of that session, I'm like calling up like parents and, different people. And I'm like, hey, talk to me about like before I was born, and there was stuff that like surfaced that like corresponded to that. And it was like really crazy. And it wasn't like, this like huge thing, but like, as I'm talking and I'm picking up bits and pieces of what they're saying, I'm realizing throughout my life, yeah, that's actually there more than what they want to acknowledge, or more than what they want to realize. Like even like the aspect of like one piece of it, like my dad like always wanted me to go and do some form of ministry. Now he's like, well, thank God that you didn't because of all this, but like he always wanted that, but I always felt that. That was always something I felt too, of like, hey, like there's an aspect of not being good enough because I'm not doing that exact thing, which, I now know that that's not, I mean, to this day, I've had times in my life, I've been asked 3 times to actually go and pastor a church. Like, it's ironic, it's weird, but like that's actually happened 3 times in my life, of people that wanted me to come and actually like candidate and pastor their church. And like, they reached out to me. I wasn't looking, like, it wasn't even something that I was like in the market for, kind of a thing. But like just going through all this and being like, hey, that's not who I'm meant to be, but that was a huge aspect that felt like there was always that like pressure or judgment that from an early age, I kind of had to like break through that mold of like, that's not who I'm going to be. And this is who I'm going to be, and exemplify and help people in a different aspect, in a different capacity.
I find that interesting. You saying there's certain expectations on you that you didn't even realize. Because, and I don't know what denomination you grew up in or whatever, but it was something with me that happened this last year where I never understood a part of my past where I never had like a conversion moment. I just grew up in the church. I just grew up, 9 months before I was born till whenever, just always in church, grew up in a very Christian family. And there was always a guilt in my life of not having that conversion story. And I could never figure out why. I don't know like who put that idea in my head, where it came from. And then this year I read a theology book basically from the Reformation on, of like what each denomination believes in their history and where they come from. And I grew up in a Methodist church, and I had no idea, like it was never taught to me, that the early Methodist belief was that you weren't sanctified until you had a conversion story. So even if you grew up a Christian and you believed in God, until you could come before the congregation and say, look, there was this time in my life where whatever, and then God like spoke to me and like everything changed. You know, that everything changed story was so embedded in the church itself, even not spoken, that I never realized that's where it came from. So I wonder if you had like, I mean, obviously growing up in the church, growing up as a pastor's kid, like there stuff like that kind of has come out, or
Yeah, I mean, in some ways, I don't think I've like tracked it back exactly like that. But like when you're talking about like even like conversion story, like I mean, I had like 3 of them. You know, I was like, oh, I got saved this year. You know, I got baptized like 3 times. You know, like all this kind of stuff. And be like, you know, 3rd time's a charm. Hopefully it sticks. You know, but like honestly, like going through everything that I do, that I've done, like I have like maybe one time I would go back and I'd be like, hey, like that's my conversion story. But then how I lived after that, I don't think I can actually like tout that. I don't think I can actually hold to that, because probably one of the biggest things I heard kind of it was a longer illustration, but I heard the idea. It was with crap. Now I'm forgetting it. Now I'm forgetting his name. But I was listening to a preacher, and it was like the idea going back to how you've been impacted by God. And like and that's how I attribute it actually in when we're talking about narcissism, and especially when I talk about Christian narcissists or like Christian abuse, because like there's an aspect of that I don't even believe is real. Because what it actually is I don't think you can be a Christian and be actively abusing, because I don't think that someone can actually say that they've been impacted by the God of the universe and not had a changed experience, not a moment, but a changed life because of that. So like, if I say, hey, I'm a Christian because I believe in God, or because like he's impacted me with what he's done in my life, and I keep doing the same stuff, then I'm not bearing the fruit of someone who actually is a Christian. And so for me, I had multiple conversion stories. I had multiple times where I, you know, accepted Jesus into my heart, kind of a thing. But at the end of the day, I wasn't living that way. And it was demonstrated even all the way through like my marriage, of like the affairs and stuff like that. So I look back now and I'm like, I don't know. I don't think I can say in confidence that I was a Christian while I was doing all those things, or that I was saved, or that I knew God to the level of actually changing my behavior, of actually repentance, you know, because I wasn't there. You know, now as I'm sitting here, like I know where I stand with God, and I know what I believe, and I know where I am, but I also can't look back and be like, oh, it was this day at this time and I haven't written my Bible.
Right.
You know, that doesn't exist, but I do know where I am now. And I think that's what's more important.
Yeah. Well, what's funny is, you know, I don't have a date when it happened. It was on my bed when I was 3 or 4 years old in the apartment that we lived in. And so that was something that I struggled with too over time. I was like, I don't have this moment, this conversion story. But one of the things that I really realized personally was I remembered the first time I had a faith slash existential crisis, which was I want to say that I was no, I was in kindergarten,
Hmm.
and or Mother's Day out, or I don't know what it was. But this is it's so silly, but it's a part of my story. And I tell it. But I had raced this little kid, this other kid. I don't know what his name is now, but as we raced, he beat me. He was gloating about being the fastest kid in the school, which I was before that. Blah blah blah. And so when he ran past again, I put my foot out and let gravity take its take I don't know what the heck I'm saying. I'm
take
so
the
tired.
reins.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm trying to get my sleep cycle back, because I like last week my
What's
average
that?
time slept was 3 hours and 33 minutes. So I'm working on it. But no, I was like, let's let nature take its course. Dude fell over and he looked up at me from the ground and he said, "You're not really a Christian." And that wrecked me as a child. That made me go through every single thing. And so it's the way that I've described my journey has been in I'm not a dispensationalist, but there my life has different dispensations. So it's like, you know, when I was little, I didn't understand what it was, but I knew my mom and dad loved God and God loved them, and I wanted to be a part of that love. And then I fell in love with, you know, like it goes through it's and every time there's a new change in life, there's a new clarity that comes with that. Like when I got married, suddenly I understood how Christ loves his church in some sense. Then I had kids and I was like, oh, this is insane. How does he love us this much, you know?
Right.
But no, I all that to say, I totally understand that. Right now, we just hit an hour and 30 minutes, and you said you have to wake up early. So let's, and you have any more questions off the top of your head, PJ?
No, this is a great conversation, by the way. I really appreciate getting to pick your brain, Ben. Sorry,
Yeah,
slurred my words.
I think it's been great. I've loved talking to you guys. Yeah.
Oh yeah. But I have the big question of the show, which I'll explain in a second. And then I have a dumb question if you're interested in that.
Okay.
Seeing as you have seeing as you have direct experience with narcissism yourself and with others, when you look at the landscape of America, when you look at pop culture, celebrities, politicians, whatever, who like I'll ask for three. Maybe you'll be able to do it. Don't worry if you can't. Could you name the top 3 people that you've noticed in any of those paradigms that are the most narcissistic, and you think you would diagnose them if you could?
That's a good question. I think it's hard to be able to actually like identify and go to the place where I'm going to actually like say like, hey, this person, because there's so many nuances and there's so much, especially with not just like culture, but also what gets put out on social media that is for, for clout, for people to get, likes, views, and then for stuff that people are saying that you don't really know, like either way. I mean, obviously a huge aspect of, things that like brought up a lot of like narcissistic talk was obviously like the Johnny Depp and Amber Heard, trial and like court case and stuff like that. And, with some of the stuff coming out of like her maybe being more of like, BPD, like borderline and stuff like that. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that I saw like in that I'm like, holy cow, like I resonated a lot with some of the stuff that she said and that she did. It was like, that's like matching up to borderline or to like narcissistic traits and things like that. I think it's interesting because a lot of times people want to peg, one president or another as being like that person's a narcissist, all that kind of thing. And I love how my therapist said it. She said it like the best way. She was like, when you look back on time of all the presidents that we've ever had, like you have to be able to say like at least every president is at least a partly, if not all the way, a narcissist, because they have to be if they're thinking they're going to run, the country that's like, a lot of times one of the biggest countries like in the free world, and so a lot of times like people want to be like, oh, this one's a narcissist. Like, when it comes down to it, the majority of them are, because you have to have some level of that to be like, hey, I can actually do this. And I think I'm qualified to run a nation.
Right. Okay. So to make it dumber, rather than NPD, what are, the disorder itself, who do you think exhibits narcissistic traits that are not necessarily diagnosable the most? Like, who do you see and you go, okay, I can't deal with looking at that person? For me, I'll give you one.
Right.
What's that guy's name? He was in One Direction. Harry Styles.
Yeah.
Okay.
Like that, he just rings of narcissist to me.
Yeah.
I
see what you mean. There's a lot of, I would say there's a lot of like social media and pop culture that I don't engage with, partly right now because I don't have time. That's a huge aspect as I'm trying to actually build the business and grow what I'm doing. There's more people that I interact with in either my like sphere of influence or in some of the social media categories that I'm like looking at or kind of going through of like, okay, like this person just came out as being a narcissist, or this person just did this, like that's very narcissistic, different things like that. So I'm more along the lines of like identifying different traits that I see as like, oh, that's a trait, than I am necessarily of coming out and like labeling people per se of like, that's a narcissist or that has narcissistic, tendencies, things like that.
Gotcha. How about you, PJ?
Gosh, good question. There's one that I'm racking my brain on right now, and I can't think of who it was, and I can't remember the full story, but it's something really awful happened to someone else, and they had to get in front of the camera and be like, look how this affected me. I don't know. AOC kind of pops in my mind a little bit for doing that pretty often. as far as, you know, like everything's about her. The Capitol riot, which happened at a different building, was about her. Yeah, I don't know. The Kardashians come to mind.
I'm definitely taking Amber Heard.
Amber Heard seems like BPD to me, though. I've known a lot of people with BPD, and
well, I mean, I'm not necessarily in PD. I just mean she definitely has narcissistic traits.
She definitely has narcissistic traits. I think if Kris Jenner can literally sit down and watch her own daughter's sex tapes to figure out which one to sell, that's some type of disorder that needs to be. You didn't hear about that? Yeah.
No, I don't pay attention to those.
Ray J, I don't usually either. Ray J, I guess, came out and was like, yeah, so that leaked sex tape of me and Kim Kardashian, Kris orchestrated the whole thing, like watched all of our sex tapes to figure out which one would be the best one to leak. Like that's a level of narcissism or just abuse that is beyond
Is that
me.
Narcissism by proxy?
I don't know what it is.
That's crazy. Wow.
It's something. I don't know. Maybe it's not narcissism, but it's seriously messed up.
Right.
All right. Yeah. So the last question that we always ask every guest. When I say we, I mean me. I'm the only one who asks the question. Okay. Over the last 2.5 years, there has been a lot of depressing stuff. There's been a lot of people who feel, what's the word I'm looking for? They just feel helpless, hopeless, etc. Mm-hmm. And when that happened, and I was doing a show that was completely different than the show that you're a part of right now, mm-hmm. I decided when we renamed it, when we rebooted it, that it was going to be a show of hope. Because unfortunately, I knew people who had their lives taken away from them in one way or another, literally and figuratively, throughout this COVID deal. Right. And so one of the things I like to ask is, what is something, because I want to share hope with people. Mm-hmm. What is something in your life, and it could be in the house, it could be local, global, state, national, whatever. Mm-hmm. What's something that gives you hope and motivates you to carry on doing what you're doing and living a good life?
Yeah. It's a deep question for the last one. Awesome.
I try.
That's awesome. That's awesome. I definitely know one aspect. I'm trying to think because I don't think that's the full answer. So I would say, so I'll just start. As one aspect for me is probably not what you think, because narcissism as a whole is the past is in the past. I don't want to think about it. I don't want to bring it up. Like that no longer exists, no longer happens because it brings out shame. Narcissist doesn't want to think about, doesn't want to acknowledge the stuff that's happened. There's a part of me that is motivated not because of where I can just go, but also remembering of where I've been. And so for me, there's a conscious effort on a daily basis. Actually, there's a conscious effort on a daily basis to not take the past and hold it so close that I'm pining or reminiscing, but also not put it so far that it's so far away that it no longer exists and it didn't really happen, but almost to kind of bring it in a small perspective of, hey, like, because I had someone ask me the other day, like, how do you manage like being bigger in one sense on like social media and not like getting a big head of it? And I'm like, I have to remember that this is the reason why I'm even on social media. Like the reason why I'm on social media is because of heartbreak, is because of ruining people's lives, is because of destroying relationships and jobs and all that kind of stuff. Like I have to like remember that. And so there's a huge aspect of my past no longer defines me, but it now develops me to be the person that I'm going to be today, and the person I'm looking for tomorrow. So that's one aspect. The other aspect is actually understanding and realizing that changing what you're viewing. So like a lot of times I'll term this in talking with people of like rewiring your mindset, change your story, change your life, change the thing that you're viewing, change the thing that you're believing. Really what it comes down to it, and what I like talking about too, is the idea of capacity. Is like the thing that the next version of you, the next person, not like reincarnation, but like the person you're going to be next as you grow, heal, and change, and as you develop, you don't even understand how big, how sensitive, how open, how vulnerable, how great that next thing can be, because you haven't expanded your mind to the capacity to be able to believe that's actually possible. So like for me, like my wife coming back and like I mentioned before, like sitting in therapy, being like, I don't want this. Like I don't want this marriage, but I'm still sitting here trying to work on myself and I'm still in the relationship, even though I don't want it. And then seeing now a year later, my relationship with my wife growing more than what at that point I thought was humanly possible. Like I thought it was done, there wasn't any hope, and helping people understand. And when you see that happen to someone else, when you see that happen when they get out of the relationship, they realize they're not crazy. When you see that happen to other people, when they kind of like transcend to the next level of like self-awareness or like self-confidence or self-worth, then they realize that they don't have to be defined about what happened, and they can actually continue to open up their capacity of like, wait a second, like the person that I am now that doesn't have any confidence, that doesn't have any self-worth is, light years past the person I'm going to be in a year, when I'm not, sitting in the corner shriveling because of the narcissistic abuse, or when I'm not, being knocked down because of things that I've done. And so for me, there's a huge aspect of seeing the change that's happened in my life and being able to see that change happen into others people's lives. Really comes back to the idea of like being able to take and understand like intrinsic rewards of like, now I'm actually getting to the place where I believe my hope is also coming from, I'm starting to live my divine purpose of like being here to actually help other people to expand their capacity, their awareness, and help them heal, grow, and change in multiple different things. And, being able to finally like get to that point of like, as I'm getting clear about who I am, it's starting to align. And for me, like this is at this point in my life, which I'm sure will be amazing, in 2 years and 5 years as I continue to dive in and learn about it. But at this point in my life, like I'm living more congruent in my life now than what I ever have, because I'm actually being true to myself. I'm being true to other people of what I'm actually doing. And I'm actually knowing, hey, this is the direction I'm going on a day-to-day basis. The intention and the mindset that I'm showing up that gives me not only that hope, but that joy as I dive into that formula, that I was kind of sharing, because that's a huge part, because I think honestly, when it comes down to it, if I stop, a big thing for me is like gratitude is very, I would say almost like anti-narcissistic, like a narcissist being thankful for another human being. Like, that's no, like it's all about me. It's not about, actually appreciating another person or another, like something else that's not directly back to me. So like, there's a huge aspect of hope, comes from the fact of like understanding where I've been, where I'm going, but it also comes from the fact of knowing that I'm living my purpose. I'm living my God divine purpose of like direction I'm supposed to go. And through that, understanding that, hey, as I tap into, that gratitude, joy, love, fear, all the way up to like, hey, this is trusting God. That also gives me hope each and every day of like, hey, I'm actually living out the person I'm supposed to be right now. And the person I'll be next year will be a new version of that as I continue to grow, heal, and change myself and on my walk.
Yeah, well, it's funny because you said that. I think one of the things that's very clear from what I've been able to tell of narcissistic people or narcissism in general is how heavily tied into cynicism it is and lack of trust, like you talked about.
Mhm.
And so seeing you in a place where you're talking about gratefulness, which is anti-narcissist,
Mhm.
and talking about learning how to trust and do that, which is anti-cynic, like that is in and of itself a silver lining, little bit of hope for me.
Mhm.
So I thank you for coming on. Thank you for saying that. Thank you for doing what you do, because I love when I run into people on TikTok or on Twitter or wherever who have a different story, and it's not one that they've given into. It's not one, it's one that they're overcoming, that they're still growing. Which, by the way, if you ever want to feel better about yourself, just go on Facebook and hit the memories tab, and you'll go, oh, wow, I was dumb. Um,
All right.
but yeah, beyond that, thank you so much for coming on. I want to let people know how to get to you. I think most importantly, you have rawmotivations.com, where
Mhm.
people can go and check out what you do, can check out how to do a one-on-one if they feel they are a narcissist or have been subject to narcissistic abuse.
Mhm.
You also, I don't know about your Instagram. I'm sure it's the same,
Yeah.
but I know on TikTok you're at raw underscore motivations, and YouTube. you are youtube.com/raw motivations.
Yep.
So
So
anything else?
everywhere else for Raw Motivations. TikTok's the only one that has like the little like underscore, but if you type it in, it still pops it back up. So we're on everywhere. Raw Motivations, TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, LinkedIn. We're on all those different platforms under Raw Motivations. We have a podcast that's the same stuff, but just trying to help, get out there on Apple Podcasts, Spotify. We have a new podcast that just dropped beginning of this month, actually, called Trauma, Drama, and Life. And that's myself and my wife. A lot of people wanted to hear like the wife's perspective. So that's like a big thing that recently is just jumped up like really quickly. I actually looked earlier today. We've done 3 episodes, and today it was ranked, I think, 162 in the US. So I was like, that's pretty surprising for 3 episodes. I was kind of shocked. So like that, we have the Narc app. That's something that's fairly new as of this year that I developed. It's an app that's called Narc, and it stands for Narcissistic Abuse Recovery Community. So it's a community of like-minded people to help them grow, heal, and change through courses, accountability, advice, weekly lives, monthly coaching, stuff like that goes into it to help those people in their journey forward. That's at narcapp.com. We just released a journal that actually is now published on Amazon, From Fantasy to Reality by Ben Taylor. And so a couple different things like that. But yeah, everything you can kind of center around goes under any of my platforms under Raw Motivations or rawmotivations.com.
Awesome.
I'm surprised you're able to get that Narc app before the FBI did. So good for you on that.
The DEA sold it to him.
Right.
Oh, that's
with some stipulations.
Right.
But yeah, so thank you so much. I'll let you go and we'll do our wrap up. But
Sounds
I
good.
really
Thanks
appreciate
Great
you.
to meet you guys and beyond. I appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Great talking
And
to you, Ben.
I'll have to
Absolutely.
stitch you later.
All right. Sounds good. Take care.
Yeah. Bye. All right, PJ. We are at the end of the show. So since you've never been a guest, like I said, it's kind of funny that you're guest co-hosting before you actually are a guest. But since you didn't do that, I'm gonna make you answer that same question because I need to know what gives you hope right now.
What gives me hope? So I find this okay. Yeah. So for me, it's funny because I feel like a lot of the stuff I talk about are kind of blackpilling, and I've always had this idea of any work that I do, any art that I do. When I did music, I would do the same thing. Whenever I wrote a song, I would go through the dark part and then always try to find the light at the end of the tunnel, kind of thing. So for me, I think that one of the problems that we see a lot of people do is they're putting all of their hope, because obviously I talk about politics a lot. People put all of their hope into politics, politicians, into the culture, into saving America, and all of that stuff. And even though I don't agree with the people who think that nothing on this earth matters, that there aren't real human costs and consequences to politics, to whatever culture, things like that. And I do think those battles are worth fighting. The hope that I always come to at the end of all of this is that one day, and I'm going to go through the black pill first. One day America's going to fall. One day the world's going to fall. Fire is going to rain from the sky. It's all going to happen. But if your hope is in Donald Trump, if your hope is in a politician, if your hope is in America, you're placing your hope in the wrong place. That's why I'm able to laugh through all the stuff that I talk about, because my hope's in Jesus Christ. My hope's in the Lord. So we win in the end. And I guess for me, that's all the hope we need,
Right. So, I definitely understand everything that you just said.
Yeah.
Because, if it's hard, it would be hard for me to answer this question because I want to answer it so many different ways.
Right.
But primary way is the resurrection.
Mm-hmm.
We will be resurrected someday. We will get to be in our ideal state. We will get to do the job of the image of God. We'll get to do what we were always meant to do. That extremely restful to think about.
Absolutely. And I think you also just have to have a warrior spirit of a joyful warrior spirit of just being, enjoying the fight as well.
Oh, yeah.
So,
well, I'll ask you, since you've been on 3 different shows with me, I think all of them were at least an hour and a half.
Yeah. I do a lot of long form. People are like, you don't do enough short form. Like, yeah, well, I enjoy the long conversation stuff.
I get that.
Yep.
But no, so I'll ask you the question because I feel like you've talked to me enough to maybe have an initial response, which is, what's your favorite thing about me?
My favorite thing about you? First of all, very narcissistic question. First of all, I don't know why, but you very much remind me of one of my favorite vocalists of a band that I used to follow. So that was kind of cool. But no, I love your sense of humor, dude. Plea for Purging.
Is it hardcore?
It kind of, yeah, metalcore probably would be better.
I'm gonna have to Google it now.
I'm really bad. Well, don't take offense because he's like way bigger than you, but just like, so no, I'm not calling you fat. Personality wise, kind of humor wise, but no, I think I've always enjoyed your sense of humor. I know I started following you on Twitter because we had like mutual friends on Twitter, and I didn't really even know who you were when I started following you, and then I saw the whole joke thing was kind of how a lot of people, I'm sure, found you. I don't know. I enjoy your sense of humor, dude. And honestly, I think because we've talked on and off podcasts before, I always appreciate somebody who can dive deep into subjects and actually enjoys the conversation, enjoys learning. So we talked about books for like an hour after my podcast that one time. So
that's true.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate you so much for coming on and being a guest co-host. I can't seem to be able to do this without that.
I don't blame you, dude. I always like having somebody else there to talk with. I get it.
Well, when you're doing long form, different stuff and different conversations like this, it's really nice to have someone else who also has questions for when you don't.
Right.
So there's that. But yeah, this is inside baseball. Sorry, people. But like I said, thank you so much for coming on and doing that. We'll have to do it again. I may have other times to fill later on. If you're interested, I'll let you know.
Absolutely.
But could you tell people all about your new podcast, the other two that you do, and what you're up to so that they can find you?
Sure. Yeah. Well, thanks again for inviting me. I'm actually really excited to be here. So I do a lot of stuff. So tomorrow night on Wednesday nights, I do Conspiracy Pilled, which is kind of a throwback to a podcast I used to do, kind of rebooting it under a new name. So kind of with a co-host, we go through different conspiracy theories that people have talked about, break them down. It's not preachy, like you have to believe everything, because we don't believe everything that's put forth, but we kind of just go through the facts of the case and give our opinions, and that's a lot of fun. On Thursday nights, I do wartime propaganda. I think that's going to be switching to 7 because I've been doing it at 9. So I was just letting you know as well, if you're ever looking for somebody for that like 8:30 slot on Thursdays, I should be available come October. And then so I do that Thursday nights, and then on Saturday nights I do the Last American Pubcast with Let's Be Frank, with Abby Libby and Tom from America Floats. It's kind of a panel. Bring up a lot of stories throughout the week. It's a digression of everything that's going on in the week. So it's drinks and laughs and fun, and kind of the way we phrase it is the news is depressing, but it's a lot less depressing if you have good friends and good drinks to take it with. So if I go back on that one, I'll be better prepared than
not whiskey.
Yeah, we're all sipping beer and Cam's just like shots of whiskey.
That's not true. He's lying. It didn't happen.
It's not on the internet for you guys to see.
Right. So with that, I'm going to tell the rest of you what you can expect. This is a 2-show week. These are rare. It will be happening more recently. What did that mean? It will be happening more in the future, just a few times in the future. But Thursday, I have the regular episode at the regular time with Dr. Hillel Gray. He is, like I said earlier, I think I said it on the show. He is a professor of comparative religion, and he has been doing a long study and research into radical sects of different religions. So he's spent time with the Westboro Baptist Church, and he's spent time with a lot of different things. And I just want to pick his brain. That's the whole reason is I want to know how you talk to someone that hateful of different stripes and not walk away just disgusted, because he really pushes for empathy.
That's got to be difficult. That's got to be difficult. Does he? You said he's on TikTok. Does he have like a top, like most extreme type thing that he talks about? Or
I don't know, because he doesn't pin anything, so it's really hard to kind of find the.
I was just curious because like everybody knows Westboro, but I was wondering if there's other ones that are.
He's just recently started talking about Satanism and is starting to look into some of that.
Did you see that? Did you see that documentary Hail Satan on Hulu?
I did not.
It's Sorry, I didn't mean to cut off what you're saying,
You're
but
good.
it's a documentary about the satanic movement in America. So the guy who leads it's got like one eye. He looks like a Bond villain, and they're the ones who took down the 10 Commandments at all the courthouses. That's
Okay,
kind of their
the
thing.
Freedom from Religion Foundation, or
Freedom from
whatever it is?
religion. Yeah, there's So
Yeah, so that's one of the. I was going to mention this earlier and I forgot to. The satanic panic that you mentioned. A lot of
mhm.
people will talk about that, like, oh, well, it was just D&D kids and stuff, and there's no Satanism. It's just Anton LaVey. They're just atheists with uh, dorky clothes or whatever. But there are actual deistic Satanists out there,
Yes.
and I think that I think that the enemy uses that dorky club in order to cover for the real darkness.
That's actually why I brought it up. I feel it's the same exact thing when people look back at McCarthyism. They look at the few things that when McCarthy went too far, and then they don't look at the fact that actual card-carrying communist members stole nuclear secrets and gave them to Russia.
Right.
It's the same
Right.
exact thing. Yeah.
Right. So let me get back to the list. After that, the Thursday after, back on the normal schedule, we have Matt CL from TikTok. He's a Bible teacher, and he's just a fun dude. And we're gonna bro out and talk. Oh, I forgot to mention Thursday with Dr. Gray. My guest co-host is going to be Buck Johnson of the Counterflow podcast. I don't know if you've heard of him.
I haven't,
He's
but I'll follow him. I'll look him up.
he's at Buck Rebel. He'll be joining me Thursday. Like I said, the week after that, it's Matt CL from TikTok. He's a Bible teacher. He does a lot of talking about Christianity and some bits of theology on TikTok, which I think is really cool. After that, it's another 2 for week. So we enter into spooky season, and there's one holdover that's not spooky, and that's going to be the Tuesday of October 4th. I'm going to be talking with Naomi Wright. She is a woman. So a couple months ago, I spoke to a guy named Ben Brown who was raised in a Mormon polygamist cult and lived on the foundation or whatever, and got out of polygamy and got out of Mormonism. This time, I'm talking to Naomi, who was raised in a cult, but it wasn't Mormon, and it was started by her father, and it was polygamist as well. And so I'm excited, and also she's still Christian, so it's like it'll be. I'm more excited a little. I love you, Ben, but I'm a little more excited about. That was the Mormon guy. This one, just because I know that she just didn't leave Christianity. Like
Right.
that makes me a little happier.
Yeah.
And then after that, we have our first spooky season show with Izzy Centric, Israel. What was his? I can't remember his last name. Israel Petty, that's his name. But he goes by Izzy Centric. He is a self-taught demonologist and paranormal researcher and Christian. And so we're going to start spooky season. Spooky season this year is going to be all about unseen warfare. I did not plan it that way. It happened that way. And I'll tell you about this offline, PJ. It's crazy how
Yeah.
this came about. But Izzy's going to come on and we're going to talk to him. And that's it for the shows. And so last things, you told people where to find you on Twitter, what you're at again.
Yeah, so you guys can find, well, the easiest way, honestly, is if you go to solo.to/PJ_Patriot. It's got my links to everything, all the different podcasts I do. But pretty much PJ_Patriot, you'll find me most places. Yeah, that's probably the easiest way. Solo.to/PJ_Patriot.
Awesome. And for me, patreon.com/themadOnes. If you want a shirt, mug, etc., wearethemadOnes.com/store. I'm on Twitter at hamcarless. If you're listening and you'd rather watch, youtube.com/themadOnes. We're also on every platform, either live or immediately uploaded thereafter. And so if you like Rockfin or Odyssey or Rumble or you name it, we're there. And if you'd rather listen, any podcatcher is going to have us. So that's all I got to tell you, except for subscribe to the YouTube page, because I'm trying to grow that out. I'm trying to do more. Please share with your friends. But with that, that's all. So I'll say the last little bit and we'll jam. Any last words for my crowd of miscreants?
Thank you guys for watching and listening. Appreciate you for having me.
Absolutely. Thank you
Yeah.
so much for coming. All right. So, like always, you have a chance to be a light in the world. So go light it up.